Hi. Hello, Mary. Hello, Dave.
Hello.
Hi. We already have about 80 people tuning in, and
Wonderful.
a lot of people are saying hello. But first of all, I don't think you need much of an introduction, but I'm going to give you one anyway. I did the math, and I'm a huge fan of yours for literally 26 years. My first teacher bought me all of your CDs, and your sound has been in my ear my whole life. And so it's been such a joy to get to know you the past few years, to see you perform more live and your friend. And thank you so much for joining us today. And you just met my husband, Dave, who you've heard about.
Yes.
So we've been, watching your interviews, and so we know there'll be some overlap. Is that your sound kind of repeating back, or is that?
Well, I'm not using headphones. Shall I connect my headphones somehow?
I think so. Yeah.
Is it better?
Yeah.
I try to check it if it works.
Yes.
Just a second.
Okay.
I don't know if it will be better.
How is that, Sergey?
Yep. Oh, that's much better.
Much better. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, my headphones are not working, but anyway.
Oh, they're working? Oh, no.
but I can hear you as long as you can hear me.
Sure.
Cool. So thank you for joining us today. And, like I said, it's been great to get to know you the past couple of years. We've been tuning into your interviews. And so we know there might be some overlap with questions, but we tried to think of some other questions. So we're not asking you the same questions. So hopefully
No problem.
we'll keep it. And then we'll take some questions. If we see anything come up on the audience that seems interesting, we'll go ahead and answer theirs too. So I'm going to start with my question. So since I watched your last YouTube live video, it's been about 3 weeks or so. So I'm curious to know what you're doing with your practicing these days. Are you learning completely new pieces, or more of the, or practicing old pieces? Like, what are the specific pieces that you're practicing these days?
It's an unusual situation for me not to have any goal and not to have any concert to prepare for, because everything, obviously, like for everybody else, is canceled, at least for the nearest few months. So I tried to work on some old things that I've recorded just to keep me in shape, some of the more difficult ones, some risky excerpts from those pieces, those concertos. And also I try to learn new things that I might need in the future. I'm trying also, just to give you an example, I'm trying to look at the Bach cello suites, and I try to play some movements with flugelhorn, but only recently started to look into it, and well, it's a very serious material, obviously, and there are many movements from those suites that are unplayable because we cannot really play chords, and compromising too much with those things might destroy it somehow. So one has to be careful with it. But it's a great experience musically.
Wonderful. So I echo Mary's welcome, and
Thank you.
Your recordings have been an influence on me from the beginning of my trumpet playing as well. So thank you for all you've done for us.
Thank you.
I had a question about your experience with Guy Touvon. I understand that you studied with him for a couple of years at the Paris Conservatory, and I'm curious to know what you liked about studying there and why you decided to leave.
The end of your question, sorry?
Why you decided to, I understand you only studied there for a couple of years.
Yes, I see. Okay, I can tell you the story, how it all began. In '93, I came to France for the first time. Well, I start from quite far, but anyway, maybe it's interesting for somebody. And I played Hummel Concerto in Cannes, in the south of France, and Mstislav Rostropovich heard me in concert. And then I suppose he liked my playing somehow, and he wanted to see me and my father backstage after the concert, and he said that I should take lessons with Maurice Andre. And what he did, he organized a meeting with Maurice André at his own apartment in Paris. So basically, for me, it was like a double audition.
Sure.
And if I had to do it today, I would be dead nervous. I would be really, really, really stressed. Back then, I think I didn't really realize how important that was at that moment. And I played, and then Maurice André asked me to play excerpts from Carnival of Venice. He liked it, and then he said that at that moment of at that period of his life, he is not teaching. He was more focused on his own concert life. And then it was his suggestion for me to enter the class of Guy Touron. So it was Maurice André's idea. And then I did so. I became student. And since I already had my concert life, they made for me this special conditions. So I could only attend trumpet lessons. And of course, I was missing very often because I had my own concerts and Guy was also traveling. So I was not attending very often. And that was for 2 years like this. And it all ended in a very, not really funny, it depends how you look at it, but I was basically kicked out of the conservatoire because I didn't come to the exam. I missed it, and I should have told the conservatoire that on the very same day I had a concert. I should have told them in advance, and I didn't. And they got really angry and they kicked me out. So this was my story in France. But what I can say about those lessons that I have attended is that I was always very much impressed with his very warm, dark sound, his sense of music, always very warm and natural. And every time he showed things in class, he played something. It was always wonderful to hear him play. This I can say.
Good, thank you.
Awesome. So the past 3 weeks, are you still kind of enjoying silence, or have you started to listen to some music?
Rarely, but lately I've been listening to a lot of Bach since I got interested in those suites. So I've been listening to the suites, to some other pieces by Bach, and it's the Bach period in a way for me.
Like, who are your favorite artists that you're listening to perform these works by Bach?
There are several curious recordings. There is this thing on the YouTube, this channel called Netherlands Bach Society. And they have some interesting recordings by different players. Some younger, older ones, very interesting. So it's difficult to name just one, but obviously the famous ones, the famous interpretations like Misha Maisky or Yo-Yo Ma or others, but also other less known players. By the way, there is this wonderful violinist who also plays viola and this interesting instrument, violoncello da spalla, I think it's called. It's like a mini cello which is put on a shoulder, and it has 5 strings. I recently discovered about this instrument. I've never heard about it. And there is this Russian violinist, Sergei Malov, who plays it beautifully. So there is his great recording, for instance, of the sixth cello suite.
Great.
But this particular one, I don't think is possible to play.
I'm interested in your interpretation of Bach. Do you choose to play it in a more romantic style with a lot of rubato, or do you play it a little more, I don't know, more linearly?
I'm still trying to find myself in this music because for me, it's rather new, really, to dive into this so much. Because so far in my life, I've only played very few pieces by Bach, like Air on the G string, obviously, Arioso, and I attempted to play this double violin concerto with a colleague of mine, Kirill Soldatov. Wow. By the way, if Kirill is watching, happy birthday, because it's his birthday. So, but I'm interested to do more Bach in the future. So how to play it, I would have to spend some time with it.
Mm-hmm.
For the greatest musicians, it was a lifetime. So how can I say right now after just a very short time?
A lot of friends here. You already answered his question, but we have Tony Prisk, who plays in the Philadelphia Orchestra, who's a friend of ours. Says hello. I'll go ahead and read the first question that I see here. I already know part of the answer to this. Do you listen to and play jazz? So I know you do enjoy jazz, so we'd love to hear more about that.
I love jazz, really. I get a lot of inspiration from jazz, but I don't play jazz. I cannot improvise. I never learned it. And I think once when I was alone, I tried to put some blues, some recording, and tried to play over it. And it was so bad that I think I blushed even being alone in the room. So since then, I didn't try to improvise. So I have something that has to be changed in my mind to open up for this. But I definitely listen to a lot of jazz, maybe even more than classical music. And for me, this huge interest in jazz started with the recordings of Miles Davis. And through him, I think I said it already once before, through his recordings, I discovered many musicians that played with him, and then so on and so forth.
I'm interested in which era of Miles Davis you like the best. He changed styles so much over his lifetime.
Somehow with me, it started with his latest period, and then I went back. So one of the recordings which I find doesn't get enough attention is called Aura with the big band.
I don't know it.
Yeah, I think it got Grammy. And it's a beautiful recording, which is at times, in a way, a bridge even between classical music and jazz somehow. John McLaughlin plays on it as well.
Okay, cool.
It was recorded in 1989, I think.
He died shortly after that? Is that right?
In 91.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, let's see. My next question. So I'm curious, the piece that we heard you play at ITG, the Ad Absurdum. I'm curious to know, my question's a two-part question. First of all, how long did you practice it before the first performance? And did you have any back and forth with working with the composer at all when he wrote the piece, or did he just write it?
I can tell you the whole story. One day I got a call from Jörg Widman. Actually, he called me. And I must admit, I've never heard of him before because I never really played contemporary music before that. And I said, of course, it's an honor, great. I'm looking forward. I was just excited to do something new. And then we had a meeting. I came to Munich. And I explained what kind of interesting techniques are possible to use on trumpet, maybe some like circular breathing, for instance, and he got very much interested in it. And then after some time, he sent me with a very difficult to read handwriting, this score, which was completely black and it didn't have any break. And actually what he did was a 15 minutes long piece, which consisted only of one passage. And I said, yeah, but it's impossible. I mean, I need to breathe sometimes at least. And then he said, no, Sergei, you can play everything. You'll be fine. And I said, no, not like that. Well, thank you for this trust, but no. And then he got really upset. And he told to my manager back then that it was the worst day of his life. It was a huge disappointment. And then he made the revision. So the first line is... well, still long, it's 2 minutes, the first line, and then still he made some orchestra parts without soloist. So thank you very much, Jörg, to think of me. And yeah, but the lines are still very long, but I think it got even more interesting because what happens in the orchestra part is also absolutely amazing and insanely challenging. It took me quite a long time to get into this piece, and I didn't agree to play the first concert before I felt confident that I could do it. So one day I just said to my manager, okay, I'm ready, but it took a while. really a long time. I didn't want to be rushed there. So obviously not every day practicing just that piece because I had other concerts, but at least a year.
Mm. That kind of ties into another question that I have for you. Even for somebody of your incredible technical ability, there must be some things that are very challenging for you. And I'm wondering how you balance this very difficult material versus material that you're more comfortable in playing day to day.
I'm not sure if I understand the question. I apologize.
Sure. So for example, while you were preparing ad absurdum,
yes,
I'm wondering if there were days where you pushed a little too far in practicing this very difficult material and coming back to material that you felt a little more comfortable with. How you balance?
I see. Okay. Well, as I said, it was not every day practicing just that, but every time I practice, I try to make at least something better, some even smallest step forward. It doesn't matter in which piece, but something has to get better, some sort of improvement. Otherwise, there is no point of in practicing. So with Widman, I really took time. I took it very slowly, bar by bar. Then I was connecting bars together. So my father taught me this way of practicing, and this works absolutely with any difficult long passage.
Mm.
One needs a little bit of patience and then make little parts, put them together, and make them kind of feel comfortable, and that you would feel confident that, yeah.
Thank you.
That you feel good with it. But soft and slow, I always say the same two words.
Mm-hmm.
So we have an interesting question from Tony from Philly Orchestra. He is curious to know, he says, you have a famously fast multiple tongue. What's your oral concept, syllables and vowels for fast multiple tonguing?
Well, I can kind of try to show what I do. So, well, first of all, one needs to know how you want to hear it. You need some sort of idea in your mind how you want to sound, because one could want a very dry tonguing, like taka 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 ta, or like how many French players for some reason do. They do daga 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 da, and the K's sometimes are not really audible. I don't know, maybe it depends on the language also for some reason. I don't know. Because I think the language we speak might affect the way how we tongue also. Mm-hmm. So one has to want some certain sound. So when I play, it's a rather dry K, and I try to even them sound-wise as much as possible with the T's. That there would be as less difference as possible.
Do you practice the K by itself very much?
Say it again, please.
Do you practice the K tongue by itself very much?
I say to some students to do that during master classes if I can see that it's a weak, kind of a weak link. But sometimes I might play slowly with accents on the Ks. Let's put it this way. So Ks do definitely get enough attention, yes, and they should. Also in the low range, which can be tricky.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question here about over practicing, and that kind of ties into one of the questions that we had. We know when you were a teenager, when you had an injury, but you had to keep playing concerts. So I'm curious to know, since you did not have a break, and I know you were careful with the repertoire that you chose, but how did you overcome that while having no break and still performing?
That was the period when actually I was a student in Paris. I just had too much on my plate because I had to, even if compared to the other students, I had more freedom what repertoire to play during my exams. But still, I had to sometimes learn some additional etude or whatever. And I had to prepare concerts for my trips. I don't know, for my recitals, for my recordings, and it was just too much. And then I didn't do enough breaks. I was probably too often trying to play high tones, which for many of us are like drugs. One has to be really careful. So at some point I started to have real issues, and in order to get back, I started to use a smaller mouthpiece. And well, since my father was supervising my practicing, he was controlling that I would do enough breaks. So that's when I started to use the cooking timer, really to time my breaks, to time carefully my breaks, that I would rest often enough. Nowadays I don't do this. I just try to listen to my embouchure and try to feel, but it really depends on what range you are playing. And I always prefer to say, it's a great excuse by the way, better not enough than too much. Because if you over practice, then maybe your next day is totally wasted. So what's the point?
When you were coming back from your injury, did you find that your mind would go to a physical place instead of creating more from a musical place?
I don't think I was thinking of these things, and it wasn't a real injury. Nothing was visible or something. It's just when I was reaching the high C, at times I would start to have this sound with sand in it, kind of with some hissing, and this was never felt good. So for my concert programs, I was choosing pieces which didn't have high range basically. And playing flugelhorn also helped me a lot because, well, one can just use low range much more. But to come back to it, to come back in a kind of a better shape, it took me some years, I must say. I was just trying to make enough breaks. I was listening to my body in a way, and I just got more careful. And I always enjoyed playing low tones, and it definitely helps.
Well,
On trumpet,
it's beautiful.
Do you want to ask the next question?
Sure. We have a question from Curly here who says, how do you ensure consistency and make sure every performance is perfect?
Well, I wish every performance was perfect. Fortunately, in music, there is no such thing as perfect. In a way, I think perfect in music is even boring. Depends what you think perfect is. But consistency, yeah, practice. When you practice, you should never compromise. It should never be okay, that's good enough. It's either good or not. So, and if it's not good, then, well, reduce the tempo till the one that you can fully control, till you can be really happy with every note. And I think the good criteria is what you've just played good enough for a recording? If not, well, it can be better, then make it better. If it's not good, well, drop the tempo, and then you don't have any excuse. Just sometimes even the connection between just two notes requires some time to make it sound properly. It depends, can be some difficult interval. Center of sound, the connection between notes, timing, all those things. Then the resistance of the notes are not the same, so you want them to be with the equal sound, for example, or maybe not, maybe you want a crescendo, decrescendo. You need to know all those things before you play, actually.
So we can hear your amazingly high standards in your performance and the way you just described your practicing. And I'm curious to know if you have similarly high standards for other parts of your life, hobbies or cooking or something like that.
Cooking, I like to eat well, but I don't cook very well. So very basic. When I play computer games, yes, I do play computer games. I try to be good, but I'm not amazing at it at all. I just enjoy doing it. Well, I would say that I'm the most serious with playing music than other things.
I have a side question. So I know that you played World of Warcraft, right?
Very much for at least 10 years, but I don't do that anymore.
So
Took too much time.
my brother used to play that too, and he's also a huge fan. He played the horn. He wants to know like what your favorite class was to play. I think that would be interesting.
My first was a female human paladin.
Cool, cool. So some of these questions are coming in that I think we've already answered some of these. Let's see. Do you want to ask one of yours while I scroll?
Sure. I'm very interested to know more about your father's influence. We understand that it was a huge influence on your musical life, and
Correct.
you mentioned that he controlled your practice sessions. And I'd love to know at what point you took control of your practice sessions, and maybe you can speak a little bit about his influence.
Of course. My father, as I say all the time, he was my main teacher. He taught me how to practice, and he was supervising my practicing for many, many years from the very beginning, even though, of course, I had at times official teachers, because since my father is not a trumpet player, he just knows how to make sounds, but well, he never played trumpet professionally. He took me to a friend of his in Gorky, now the city is called Nizhny Novgorod, and I was taking lessons with this trumpet player. But then at home, twice a day, I was practicing with my father, and all those ideas to try more difficult repertoire, it was from my father. So basically, every time I had a trumpet teacher, he was pushing those teachers to give me more and more difficult things. Then my father was ensuring that it would be prepared. So, and over the years, I just learned from my father this serious attitude towards practicing, that one has to be perfectionist. And I think I started to travel without him quite late. I would say after a millennium already, quite late. So only my last 2 recordings I did without his help on my own. And still yet, even today, when I visit my parents, they live in Israel, when I practice, I know that he's listening, and he gives me advices very often, and very often good ones. So.
Does he still make arrangements for you?
Not now, but he wrote so much that I don't have time to learn it all.
Wow.
Most of those are published with a Swiss edition company, Mark Reift.
Great.
So, yeah.
Let's see. Oh, did you start trumpet before or after your adult teeth came in?
After my teeth changed, I started trumpet. I was 9 years old.
Okay, we have a ton of questions here. We're like scrolling through. You want to pick one?
Yeah, here's an interesting one. The question is from Perry Gonzalo. Sergei, how do you maintain the focus all the time during performance? And I would love to extend that question to your practice sessions, which show your amazing ability to concentrate.
Well, staying focused during a concert performance, this is what helps me to be less nervous. If I'm focused enough, then there is not much, let's say, mind left that would get nervous somehow. And still yet I'm nervous, but being focused helps a lot. I'm just busy. I'm busy with what I'm doing. It's like telling a story, and one has to be focused enough to tell it properly somehow. Focus during practicing, well, same thing. Just you need to know what you want, Listen carefully to yourself. Each note, everything that comes out of your instrument should be under your control. Nothing should be happening by itself. If something is happening by itself, then, well, it needs a lot of attention. You have to play the trumpet, not the other way around.
Right. So because Mary and I have watched a lot of your interviews, we probably know the answer to this question, but maybe this is a new audience. And so the question is, do you spend more time on practicing the pieces that you are playing or on basics or technique?
Definitely the pieces that I play, because I don't play etudes. I never really did. So my daily practicing consists of a rather short warm-up. Someday, lately a little longer than when I was a teenager, somehow. It takes a little longer to wake up the embouchure. And then I start to work on the pieces that I need to prepare. And obviously, in those music works, there are some difficulties that require attention, that can get better. And well, those are my etudes, in a way.
Do you have a memory of, your first year of playing, kind of how you approached trumpet from the beginning? Like your first few months, do you remember what you were playing?
Just some simple songs that I knew how they sounded. Instead of etudes, I was just playing songs, which were popular back then in Soviet Union. Well, Russia. Back then it was still Soviet Union.
Do you, my guess is that you memorize pieces fairly quickly, and I'm curious to know if that's true, and I would also like to know if you find it easy to pick out melodies by ear.
There are definitely players who do it a lot better than me, and lately I wasn't pushing myself, and maybe that's a mistake, I wasn't pushing myself to learn something very quickly by memory. Usually I prefer to take time, so that the music would kind of mature in my mind and would get learned, would get there by itself somehow. Because after enough practicing, it's just there. But it depends on the piece, of course. If it's some very modern work, well, it might get extra attention. But let's say after many years of playing ad absurdum, some of the lines I do know by memory, but yet I use the score, because if I ever get lost in this piece, then how to get it together with the orchestra? This would be a challenge, I think.
Right.
This is an interesting question. Let's see here. He says, we always talk about that trumpet players can learn a lot from singers and instrumentalists, but what can other instrumentalists learn from trumpet players?
Depends on the player, of course, but I think sound, maybe. Depends on the player, again. But it's a very interesting question, and I think it really depends who is the musician. So I can say that among the trumpet players, when I started to play, of course, there was several players that inspired me with their sound. I can name a few. Of course, the first one was Timofey Dakshitzer. He was my main inspiration on trumpet. And then later I discovered, well, actually also at that time, since we had a very limited access to the recordings, since the Soviet Union was a closed country, but yet we could listen to recordings from the Eastern European countries, the socialist bloc, so to say. So Ludwig Güttler, Eastern German trumpet player. And then there was the early recordings of Arturo Sandoval, absolutely amazing. There was that. And later, when it became a little bit easier for some people to go abroad, some of the musicians would bring some tapes with the recordings of Wynton Marsalis and Maurice André, and later I discovered Rafael Mendez and Guy Tauron and others. So, but sound-wise, Timofey Dokshitzer, Maurice Andre, but in a way maybe equally Guy Touron, because I think in their playing they have a lot in common.
Mm.
And then unfortunately I never heard Maurice Andre live, but Guy I heard, and Winton sound I must say also. So this sort of mix, and then Rafael Mendes obviously, but he's a kind of a genius apart from everybody else. He's I think yeah, the greatest virtuoso of all times.
Mm. So Sayori Sabori asks, do you approach differently when you play in front of orchestra versus playing solo or chamber recitals?
If I approach differently, well, the feeling is different. If I play in a chamber group or with piano, it's a more intimate feeling. It's just like talking, like having this intimate conversation with, you know, if it's just with piano or in a trio, or kind of a more kind of cozy, intimate situation. To play with an orchestra, I don't know, probably I would feel more surrounded by this big energy somehow.
Mm.
Again, depends on the orchestra, depends on the conductor, it depends on the music partners that I play with. Sometimes there is good vibe and you just feel this is right. And usually this right moment, unfortunately, happens not during concerts, but during rehearsals. Somehow.
That I have a question that comes to my mind because I've started doing a lot of solo work, and I'm often required here in the States for concertos to rehearse like right before the concert for like an hour and a half. So do you have that happen a lot? Like, how do you deal with building the strength to be able to, or do you rehearse the day of concert with an orchestra, or do you say no?
I try to avoid these situations, and I know most orchestras require this, but then either I play with half sound or I skip some lines if I really need to do that. But I think the main goal is that the soloist should be able to give 100% of what he can to the audience, and because the audience doesn't care if you are tired or if you are feeling not good or if you ate something wrong, you didn't sleep or whatever problem you may have. The goal is not the rehearsal, after all. And I think some orchestra managers should think a little more of our issues.
I agree.
Depends. It depends on the piece, of course. If it's not high, if it's physically not a demanding piece, then I don't mind. Let's say, for my nerves, it feels better to rehearse before the concert, but well, then I'm not really fresh anymore.
I'm interested to, you've mentioned nerves a couple of times, and we've received a couple of questions also about performance anxiety. I expect that your experience with performance anxiety is very different from other people because you are up on stage performing so much. But I would love for you to speak about your experience with that.
When I was a teenager, I didn't really think of it. Of course, I got excited on stage. But usually it was rather a positive experience. Different, of course. I felt responsibility. I wanted to do my best, again, focused. Lately, I started to feel, this is a very honest talk, yeah. Lately, I started to feel more pressure somehow. Pressure to be, let's say, pressure to deliver what the audience expects from me. And then there is this additional thing that every concert feels like a live recording, because there are so many people with their cell phones, and well, it's difficult not to pay attention at it. And from my nature, for me, when I'm on stage, I'm not, how shall I say, the audience rarely helps me. I'm in my own world, and there I happen to be there, so, and they watch how I suffer. Basically. Sometimes it's like this.
Cool.
But again, if one is focused enough, and if one is well prepared, and if you really enjoy the music that you play, if you really, if you are in a good company, surrounded by the musicians that you like to work with, then of course it makes your experience a lot better. It depends.
We've had a couple of questions about Dockschitzer. Our good friend Tony gets another question here. He says, I met Dockschitzer at ITG in '97 in Sweden. Did you study with him at all, or did he give you advice for your solo career?
I never took any lesson from him. At some point, my father wanted me to take lessons from him, but it never happened for various reasons. And then we left the country, we immigrated to Israel. And only many years later, when I had a concert in Lithuania where he was living his last 10 years, I met him. And I was actually making a recording with the Lithuanian Chamber Orchestra. And Timofey Dockschitzer was present at the recording session. So he was there. So wow. We could talk with him, and it was very interesting. And then we discussed, obviously, arrangements, because he recorded so many of those himself. And but I still consider that even though I didn't take lessons from him, but I learned so much from his music making, from his recordings. So until today, he is an inspiration. Yeah. By the way, in 2021, it would be his 100th anniversary.
Oh, wow. Great. There was a question earlier on about Dockschitzer's warm-ups, and if you knew much about those, or if you ever did his warm-ups or his exercises.
He wrote a book of so-called vocalizes, like mini etudes, and one of those I use a little bit modified. I use to warm up, basically arpeggios going up and down, but I extend it with a little lip trill at the end and extending to the pedal range. So basically to cover all the range. But one could invent, anyone could invent such a warm-up. Nothing special about it.
Mm.
Well, we've got a question from a young, talented trumpeter. I don't know if you know Kaitek. He wants to know any advice on improving high register staccato.
Say it again, please. I apologize.
He wants to know how to improve my high register.
How high? That's the question. If it's really high, then I'm not the right person to ask. It depends how high. But I would answer the same way as for any other range, soft and slow.
I agree with that. Cool. Let's see. We're not asking that question. Someone wants to know if we want cereal. No.
Okay. I have a question for you. So when we heard you perform in Sarasota with the Sarasota Orchestra a few years ago, we picked up your album Vidmung. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly.
Vidmung, yes. Mm-hmm.
And in addition to the beautiful music and emotion and phrasing that you performed with, your intonation is amazing on that album. And so I would like to know if you use drones at home to work on intonation, or a piano, or you just go by your ear and that's it.
Just listen to yourself.
Right.
And then eventually, if you play with piano, you'll realize when you're out of tune.
Mm-hmm.
it depends on your connection with the instrument. I must say that lately I'm trying new trumpets, which intonation-wise are really different from my old one that I've played for 25 years. And well, I realized that to get this connection, it might take time. But again, your ears will help in any situation. It's just your embouchure needs to feel and remember the placement of every center. And since our trumpets are not really perfect in tune, because it's very relative, for, let's say, what is perfect for me may not be perfect for you. The same with mouthpiece. So some notes you need to learn how to play off center in order for them to be in tune. So this takes practicing, and especially with flugelhorn, which in the low range is really out of tune from its nature. So it takes a lot of time to get this tuning right. Again, you shouldn't let it play by itself. So just listen to yourself and avoid anything happening on its own.
When you're preparing some music, do you plan out your phrasing, or do you play it in a more intuitive way?
Both, I would say. But as a general idea, I think before saying something, you need to know what you want to say. So think first, you should have some sort of idea how you want to play, what you want to tell, where the line goes, where's the climax point. When you reach the top, when do you kind of relax? So, I don't know.
Now
some thinking is required.
Now a non-trumpet question. I'm interested in this too. You've traveled all around the world. What are some of your favorite places that you've been to?
Over the years, I developed a special connection with Japan, somehow. I've been there many times, and it's really enjoyable every time. Amazing concert halls. But sometimes even in some lesser known places, it can be a great experience. Some small towns, but just the right ambience, the right feeling. And then most important, the people. So this experience meeting new people can be really wonderful. So actually can be anywhere. I like to travel. I'm used to travel. Sometimes it becomes a little too much, but now, well, at the moment, I'm not complaining because it's a long-lasting vacation in a way for everyone.
Yeah, I've been keeping track of the days with 100 days of practice, day 56, and it's so unbelievable the times we're living in right now. But it's been fun to get to talk to people and sleep, and I've enjoyed it. I've heard you talk about this in other interviews, but this would be interesting, I think, for everybody. From
Hoami is a student of mine, and Hoami asks, what inspired you to transcribe horn concertos for flugelhorn?
There is not much change in those concertos. I just take the horn part and I play the flugelhorn. Well, the main reason is that it's beautiful music. Otherwise, we are stuck with our very little narrow world. So, and since I have flugelhorn, I can play those low tones. So quite a few horn pieces found a place in my repertoire.
Cool.
as well as pieces written for cello, some pieces written for oboe, which can be played 1 octave down. So it becomes like a cello version of an oboe piece. So one has to try.
Have most of your plans been canceled for the summer, like the rest of us? Like, do you have like the next 3 months free at least?
More or less, yes.
And besides practicing the new pieces that you're working on, the Bach and everything, what are your other plans for the summer? Are you just going to keep doing more or less of the same, you think?
I teach a little bit online, and then slowly, when the restrictions will be lifted, at least some, well, I would like to meet some friends, carefully, of course. And for the moment, well, I stay at home, and my situation is rather good because I can practice, which is very important. So the neighbors don't complain. I don't have immediate neighbors, so which is great.
Cool. All right. I'm scrolling through all these questions.
I have another question for you. So when you left the USSR, I believe you went to Israel first?
Correct.
And at one point, I think you mentioned that you served in the Israeli army. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. I did 3 months.
3 months?
Yes. It was shortened for me because at the end I had a choice either to do 3 years in a military orchestra, but then I would have to cancel all my concerts, or to do 3 months in a regular army. So, which I chose because it was shorter.
Yeah. Interesting.
I got a special conditions because I got so-called what was it called? An exemplary musician title, sort of thing.
That's good.
I have to say the CD that I listened to the most, especially during my first year at the conservatory, was your elegy CD that you recorded with your sister.
With my sister, correct.
And yeah, I listened to that CD so many times, and it was interesting for me because you know, I was pushed to pursue an orchestral career, and but I just loved. That was my favorite CD when I was a kid. That CD was traveled with me many years. I just wanted to share that with you. It's upstairs, buried upstairs, but I was so happy to see that it's on Apple Music now. I think all of your albums now are most of them are on Apple Music. I think there's a few, maybe a couple missing.
I think it depends on the country.
Okay.
But this particular album, I remember very well that I was working on it in a very detailed way with my sister. She was basically telling me a lot about those songs and the lyrics and what it was all about. So, because she's very much into this opera world.
And I have to say, the Tchaikovsky song that you play, Does the Day Rain, that you've played that since you were quite young.
Correct.
And when we were at Lieksa Brass Week in Finland, and some of the ladies in my group had not heard you play before, and when you played that piece, you know, I think we all had tears in our eyes, and you know, Rachel loved it so much. We now have a brass quintet arrangement where she plays the melody. But it's a nice memory for us as a group because we really just enjoyed hearing you. So now we carry that piece in our repertoire, and Rachel plays that. So I wanted to tell her about that.
Well, I'm happy to hear.
So I know this chat thing will end in a couple of minutes on its own. So I just wanted to thank everybody for tuning in, and Sergei, thank you for spending an hour with us. It's such an honor.
Thank you so much. It's an honor for me too.
You're like the equivalent of what Doc Schützer was for you, for me. Like, just, I grew up with your recordings, and it's just such an honor to get to know you now as an adult and as a friend. And like, I just really cherish the friendship that I have with you. And thank you, everybody. And I'll share this with you, and have a good evening. We're just starting our day here in the States, and
practice time for me.
Thank you so much, Sergei. Wonderful.
Thank you. And stay safe. most important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You too.
Too.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Bye.
Bye.